Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. It's time for our American friend TJ to ask us some questions about Canadian politics. Take it away, TJ.
Hi Dale, the Curious American here. We have a lot of action going on north and south of the border in terms of leadership. And as you can probably imagine, I've been pretty wrapped up in the Democratic primary, I wouldn't say race for the nomination, I don't even know what it is. Three-legged race maybe, or potato sack race, or egg and spoon race. That's kind of how it seems
Something
right
like
now.
that, yeah.
Yes. And I've also been quite interested in the conservative leadership race, and I'd love to know, is there a way to compare them? I've been seeing some articles floating around in Canadian media trying to draw parallels. I don't know if that's like a true comparison. I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
Well, it's not a true comparison in the sense that, the systems are completely different, but at the same time, there has been this movement in Canada to try and essentially LARP these American primaries through our own leadership contests, which, as someone who finds the whole process of leadership selection in Canada as being one of our original sins with how our system is basically, I don't want to say failing, but it's one of the reasons why our system's not working the way it's supposed to. And so that's why I think this kind of comparison between the two kind of gets to a crux of a bit of an issue about how things are not working in Canada the way they're supposed to, because we keep trying to emulate this American primary process.
I had a visual just now, almost like an immune reaction, rejecting a foreign invader. And it's interesting when you introduce these foreign concepts into kind of grafting them onto other political systems. And then the moment pressure, in this case, what I'm thinking of is economic pressure, is applied, you kind of see where the cracks are. Mixing a lot of metaphors today, my friend, but you can take it away from there.
I wouldn't say it's so much economic pressures in the case of the leadership contests, but what I think has happened, it's one of my central theses in both my book and in a lot of my writing, is that because we have grafted on this American primary light into the way our leadership contests work, it's allowed for the centralization of power because it gives those leaders this false sense of democratic legitimacy that they then turn around and use to lord over the elected MPs in their own caucuses. And basically saying, to the MPs that I was elected by X number of thousands of people, and, kind of like they have more democraticness than the people who were elected to serve in ridings. And as a result, it created that kind of centralizing tendency far more than anything else I find in the development of how Canadian politics has worked. And so when you're talking about economic pressure and stuff, I think it does, I guess, reflect in just how much that centralization of power tends to, it does show cracks, I guess, a bit in the system, because there become fewer relief valves within the party structures themselves if everything has become so focused on the leader itself.
This is a very interesting moment, I think, for both countries. Especially both in the micro of what's actually happening in Canada with the blockades and the Iran airline situation and all sorts of other issues at hand. And then in the US, you obviously have our slow march to 2020 elections, which is inexorable at the moment. But it's something I'm curious about as well. Where do you see the system evolving to? Have there been regular changes, or was it just sort of this jump to an American influx of policy styles? And do you think it's going to keep changing?
Well, it has been a gradual influx. I mean, the first change really happened in 1919 when we started delegated conventions for parties. And basically, what that meant was every riding in the country would send delegates to a convention, and those delegates would then vote on who the leader would be. And it creates this sense of drama in terms of, when one person drops off in a ballot and where their delegates go to and so on. And the only party that's still doing that right now is the Ontario Provincial Liberals, and they're in their own leadership contest right now using this very delegated system. Whereas pretty much all the other parties have moved to a kind of one member, one vote system of some variety. And, that ends up determining who the leader is. And they've been moving more and more to, progression. The progression is now to these ranked ballots, so that you're not having to have people vote again over a weekend and whatnot. I can recall a few years ago the NDP held a leadership contest where there was partially mailed-in ranked ballots, partially people voting online, and it was a DNS attack or DDoS attack. Anyway,
both of those are things. Yes.
That just jammed the voting and created a huge giant mess. So we're moving more and more toward these ranked ballots, and the Conservative Party is doing that right now. And what they did the last time was not only was it a ranked ballot, but they had an event instead of a convention where they created this artificial sense of drama for each ballot where the name got dropped off at the bottom and so on and so on. So they're trying to create, keep that kind of artificial sense of it. I guess what I am kind of curious about is how that compares with the primary system, because I keep hearing now, 2 primaries in, and they're talking about, there might be a contested delegated convention.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that dynamic is similar. But I guess it's also different because you go state by state, whereas
Exactly.
we do the whole country in one fell swoop.
And we have such a carry-on effect, which is why, beyond the actual, I won't say incompetence, but maybe lack of preparation on the Iowa front that we had, some of the big actual news out of that was that the people who did well did not benefit from the Iowa bump, as it's called, because the results were so kind of murky for so long. And crucial to this state-by-state kind of rolling along, picking up steam thing is that actually that ability to pick up steam, to be able to declare we did this well, we did this poorly, but we're going to do better next time. And it's really thrown a light onto some of the more, I guess for the general public, esoteric elements of how we choose the Democratic Party nominee. Or the Republican process has got a different setup, but obviously with our two-party system kind of driving it, it'll be interesting to see how that evolves, and if you then in turn see an impact on the Canadian, sort of a ripple effect, northern-wise, with the reforms of the structure that are probably going to happen after this election.
Right. I guess one of the other things I find interesting in the contrast is the way the Americans kind of use the primaries to knock off the also-rans.
Yes.
And so all the ones who were making a presidential bid in order to prove a point start falling off, whereas we don't really have that same effect
Prove a point or
build a profile.
Yes, or desire to be, made a cabinet position of some sort.
Yeah.
Or vice presidential nom.
but I think there is a similarity there in Canada as well, where you have all these people who are no-hopers who are building a profile, but hoping that should they win a seat in the next election, that they and should the party form government, that they can get a cabinet post out of it or something. I don't know that that's borne itself out in the previous couple of contests. In fact, I find a lot of times the also-rans can't even win a seat, which I think is also problematic for the way in which we run these particular contests.
I have a question about that. I saw something this week about a freeze on election on like the seats of the Conservatives until June 2021. I didn't really understand, and then the MPs wanted it to be a longer date so they could focus on quote unquote doing their work. What is this premise?
So the premise is that normally you have writing nominations are contested so that it be an open nomination, and a sitting MP would have to defend their nomination against anyone else in the riding.
As soon as an election is called overall.
It doesn't necessarily mean a lot of parties will start the nomination process well in advance of an election, so that they've got a candidate in place when the election happens. And what often seems to happen is that sitting MPs like to make them try and get rules put in place so that their nominations are protected. They don't have to run against a challenger in their own riding, so that they can focus on their work in Ottawa. It's a bad practice. It's kind of anti-democratic, and it's really avoiding the kind of accountability that our system is built around.
Sounds a bit like tenure gone wrong.
It's a little bit. And like the Liberals did this in the last election, but they put rules around it. So if your nomination is going to be protected, you need to be able to raise so much money. You need to make sure that your riding association has so many members. You need to, have certain, and also they had a door knocking requirement as well, that you need to have knocked on so many doors over the past year.
So that's quite democratically engaged evidence.
So I mean, the point was to show that you're still engaged in the process, but I still think it's something that removes that sense of accountability that should be there as part of a nomination. And we had a couple of instances where you had people who would claim that, well, my nomination, is in question because I haven't always followed the line. But it's like, no, you didn't meet the conditions for your nomination to be protected. That's kind of on you, not on the party,
So it is a fertile ground for spin doctoring.
oh, it is. So yeah, that's what that's about. So yeah, these MPs. Especially because it's a hung parliament right now, and an election could theoretically happen at any time. They want to be able to say that they're focusing their attention in Ottawa and not having to be in their ridings, because we need to they always need to be in Ottawa in case there's a vote and so on. But again, I have a fundamental problem with the notion of protected nominations, but that's what they're basically asking for.
And I guess my last kind of observation, I don't know whether this is just because I'm an expatriate, but I have this sense that the rules around Canadian manifestations of its democratic arms feel much more fluid than they do in the States. Like the idea of changing any kind of these rules, like this Iowa thing, they were saying, even if they wanted to change one thing about delegates, it would take a decade. And it's interesting hearing you talk about the evolution of these things, because I do feel like in a positive way, you have a much more agile, reactive system that's maybe able to keep up with contemporary needs in the internet, to be very frank, in the digital news world, in a way that's much more responsive than what we have in the States. Our sort of tanker ship of trying to turn right or left there.
Yeah, and that's true. Part of it is also just structurally different. In Canada, federal elections are under federal authority. So it's a federal central agency, which is arm's length from government, that runs them. It runs on federal legislation. So it's more responsive in that regard. And we saw a whole thing in the previous two parliaments about changes to the Elections Act, one under the Harper government that people complained made it harder for people to vote because they put in new voter ID requirements and so on. And then the Liberals went and repealed those and tried to give the Elections Canada some more powers and authorities. So it is agile in that respect. With the primaries versus leadership contests, they're internal to the party in Canada. And it's again on a federal basis and not state by, or not province by province or state by state, I guess would be. So yeah, we don't have the same kind of inertia around it, I guess. And particularly when you've got in the states like Iowa and New Hampshire, who insist on being early out, and they've got, I think Iowa has a law that they have to be the first out.
They do. We've got a lot of these quirky old laws that are still having a pretty big impact on our country's politics.
I glanced reading that someone was saying if Iowa wasn't first, then it would devastate the entire state's economy, and so on. And so, yeah, we don't really have that same kind of, I guess, inertia in the system here. It's the way it's structured is a little easier to change.
Well, that's very interesting, and I think something that I'm going to keep in mind when looking at further comparisons between these two processes unfurl over the next couple of months. Actually, what is the timing on the Conservative leadership?
Their convention is set for June.
Okay, yes. All right, so it is a parallel process almost.
Almost.
Yes. Yay, lots of months of analysis ahead.
And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.